economic necessity overtakes cultural norms and a new role for the woman is defined. The government introducing safeguards to ensure they are not confined. From the Paper Microphone Cafe in Islamabad, this is The Other Line.
With me today, Sherry Rahman, Member National Assembly from the PPP, and Dr. Fawzia Said, author and women's rights activist. Assalamu alaikum, welcome to The Other Line from Islamabad. I'm Anjum Rahman. The issue of sexual harassment in the workplace as well as violence against women is something that we've all heard about for years and years, and as professional women who've been working for a very long time, we come across it, but there's never really been any formal process that we've been aware of. So I thought I'd bring both of you on board and we discuss the bill that has already been passed and the one that's going to be discussed over the next few weeks. Thank you very much for joining me. I'm going to start with you, Sherry. This has been your baby. So let's...
it's been a collective baby, and I have to really give credit to Fawzia here for bringing to us the base to work with, and I have to say that all women MNAs and as well as men worked with us when I was Women Minister in all the stakeholder meetings with dedication, with commitment, and totally across party lines to find a way forward through what has been always women's issues become controversial in public space. But we did find that even just now in Parliament, the parties, all the parties, the Q League, the MQM, the ANP, obviously the PPP, they were all very receptive. I went to each of them. I remember I didn't sit down that day. I was just constantly lobbying with all the members, and they were receptive. They appreciate being asked. They appreciate some credible advice and input. So I think that is very clearly the way forward. And I also appreciate the media's not just assistance but constant awareness to the public that this is a law that will bring not instant relief, but it will set up an infrastructure of laws that establishes very clearly that women and men who are discriminated against in the workplace on the basis of sex or gender will be afforded protection by the state. Now that doesn't mean that overnight gender discrimination will end either from the corporate sector or the fisheries where poor women work. It's a very wide swathe we are cutting, but it does mean that there is the first step laid, and we as women and men will know that there is the law on our side. Now that's a very important first step, and that's something that has to be taken to proceed further.
So you've been working on this for a long time?
Yes.
And what sort of a process did you go through to reach this juncture?
See, we have been doing research on this issue, and we have been talking to women in different fields, like even domestic workers, those in office environments, working in sales, many other professions. And we were also looking at the dynamics. So we started off with the policy first, like an anti-sexual harassment policy in the formal sector. And that experiment was very successful, and that is why we thought that now we need a legislation to give it a backing, so that we cannot voluntarily go through the whole country and get them to adopt the policy. And that is where our parliament comes in. And I think it is champions like Sherry who really then take the thing forward, because we can take it up to a certain extent. We can come up with ideas, we can come up with alternatives and do the groundwork and also pilot test it. I think this will be one bill or one act eventually which actually has been implemented first in on a pilot basis, and then it became a law, because it is such a sensitive issue. And the cultural dynamics and the kind of stigma and the issues related to reputation, they all make it so complex that it was extremely important for us to have it in tuned with the cultural milieu.
Yeah, that's right.
So that it is not something in theory where we say yes there is a law, but then women do not have the courage to actually go out and report. So that is why I think that it was really nice the way when parliamentarians or people like Sherry, they understand the subtleties of the issues so well, they can really appreciate the intricacies and take them forward and actually improve them and take them forward. You know, it is not just a blatant thing. It has to be very complex to deal with a complex problem.
Well, here's the question, because in any conversation I've had with people in the armed forces, people in the public sector, in corporations, they always say if a woman leaves her house and decides to work, then she is the one who's responsible for how people treat her. There are some who are so strong and they so know how to put people in their place that no one dare cross the boundaries with them. So again, how do you change that mindset, And
that's a very right way to score argument.
Yes.
And that's exactly what
you need to address.
Yes.
Exactly.
And that's something the law won't be able to change. This is something that behavior change through basically public awareness campaigns. Some the government can put through, some civil society, and the rest really falls on the media. I do appreciate one of our channels putting in, and you've worked with them, you see Fauzia's name also on that. They created a little scripted card about what constitutes sexual harassment on the streets while you're on your way to work. And I think that kind of bite-sized information, kind of commercial really makes a difference. It goes a long way in symbolizing what actually happens, and that women are not out there to misuse this law, because obviously that was the first question raised, and we were at pains to put that reservation to rest, and I think that's important that we do. But in any case, women in the working environment face a host of challenges and obstacles. So even the law that we are providing, the business of making inquiry committees and all that, those are still within the corporations, the organizations, the feudal structures they're working within. I think they very strongly need another public recourse, which is why I've insisted on provincial and federal ombudsmen for women, so that you as a friend of mine, if I'm reluctant to compromise my reputation, and women have issues with that, as it is they're under accusation, well, why aren't you strong enough to guard your own image? And the behavior, it's entirely your responsibility. It's an argument as old as hills, and it's very anti-minority and women or any vulnerable person. So I mean, I think a man should be able to use it also. After all, in exceptional positions are in positions of power, and they can also be guilty of misconduct on this basis. So I think it should be across the board and universally applicable. But the issue really is taking that first step. First of all, understanding that what is happening to you is real, it's not your fault, because the weight of the community is against you always, in the best of societies, okay? In the West, in developed democracies, especially there. And you have to take, that understanding it's not your fault, understanding that you actually have recourse, and you may lose your job, because everybody in the organization will then turn against you. Well, she's this black sheep who's raising issues that are uncomfortable. So this all has to be thought about. Therefore, the ombudsman recourse to that. Another friend can represent you or go with you, and many, I think, alternatives should be created. So the courage to actually realize that you are not at fault and that you can report your the behavior being meted out to you. It's a form of aggression at the workplace, and it's stigmatized all over the world in civilized societies, and we must also adopt that course.
We have to go for a break, but when we return, I'm going to come back and ask both of you what the difference between the two laws are and how they're going to be implemented. We'll be right back. Welcome back. So let's discuss the two bills. Okay. The one that's already been passed. So
I can
tell us a little bit
describe very briefly
That's right.
both of them. The
Yeah.
first one that has been passed is actually an amendment in Pakistan Penal Code which changes section 509. 509 already had the spirit of curbing sexual harassment, but it was very vague. So most of the crimes were not really charged under that. What we have done is, like together with the government, rewritten the whole thing. So now sexual harassment is defined properly, and all the examples
what?
are sexual harassment is any act or action or gesture, verbal, non-verbal communication or written communication which annoys or threatens the other person. It also includes any invitation for sexual links or any kind of retaliation for non-compliance. And this behavior has been now declared crime, and this
The
might be-
retaliation has also been declared a crime.
Yes.
Okay, that
No,
is.
that's a huge.
That's what I'm saying.
thing,
That is
because
huge.
you can hamper your promotion.
Yeah,
you
exactly.
can-
Yes.
And make sure you don't get transport from the factory home.
Yes.
What
To
kind
make
of things?
life as
And
difficult
then
for
this
you.
may be in the private space or public space, workspace, whichever, wherever, inside the home, in the transport, in hotels, and at workplace, anywhere. And the punishment is maximum 5 lakhs in terms of fine and maximum 3 years in imprisonment. It could be
It's a
both
start.
also. It's up to that is the limit. Now the other law is basically for formal sector, and that is instituting monetary mechanisms to for the betterment of the organizational culture. So all institutes, may those be private or government or civil society organizations, they will be asked to institute a code of conduct, which is basically like anti-sexual policy, and establish a 3-member committee which will actually handle all the complaints on
So
sexual
the
harassment.
problem, if you have one, you can go right there within your organization
Yes.
and
You can
deal
walk
with
up to your
it
supervisor, you
confidentially
can
as
go
opposed to
directly to one of the inquiry committee members,
Right.
which is very easy for
And
women
informal.
to do. Yeah.
it's more
I
relaxed.
have a slightly different view on that. I'm always skeptical of committees, and I think it's essential to form one. But even when we were discussing this bill, I feel that it's difficult for women to approach anything within an organization.
Yes.
Therefore, the ombudsman is necessary.
So that becomes another element.
Yeah, there must be another avenue outside the organization. My experience is that even if it is done in confidence, the leaks will happen. That's real life for you. And although the law provides for a member of the committee being replaced if they are the offenders,
Yeah.
but sexual harassment is essentially a function of power. And that's usually what is used against people. And if those are on the inquiry committee or are able to affect the actions and decisions of the behavior of the inquiry committee, then you've got a problem.
Sometimes the owners can also do that, and you cannot really fire an owner.
I mean, state-owned,
So-
lots of state-owned communities.
Organizations,
So
if they are
then
not.
there is a provision of having an independent ombudsman, and we are hoping to get women eventually on those positions. So a woman has the first level where it is organization, then they have this ombudsperson who is outside the organization, and then they have the courts, which
So
is
three
so
recourses.
three levels of relief. Which actually would, I think, be very practical once we get into the implementation phase.
When you're talking about implementation, you said this has already been practiced in a case
Yes.
study situation in the formal sector. Could you give us, what the findings said?
Yes,
what
because there are more than 300 organizations that have already adopted. Yes, signed up, and they have experience of about 4 years, most of them. And we've conducted a study, and we found out that wherever the manager very sincere and was serious about it, the code is working beautifully. And I can give you many examples where they have fired even very senior managers on the basis of this policy. And wherever there was a high turnover within the HR department or the heads of the organizations, every year that is where it didn't really work well, because the intention was not behind the code. But
Right.
once it's legally implemented, the case will be
So
different.
what did you do? You went in and you spoke to the
Yes.
HR people, and then they organized seminars or information
No,
was
what
dispersed?
we do
or
have a specific process of adoption of the code. We used to say the government first needs to reach a consensus that they want this policy. Then they need to get everybody on board and do an orientation. Then we need to put it, like display it somewhere. and announce the names of the inquiry committee members, and also send us, like from Asha's platform. We used to put them on a website, all the names of the inquiry committee and the address of that organization, just because we didn't have any control over anybody. It was a voluntary affair, but just to have it on the record. And then organizations that were seriously, we used to do an annual monitoring also on our own, and we used to give them awards like the most gender friendly companies in the year, and many companies have gotten awards from us too.
I think that can be institutionalized by the Women's Commission.
That
I
would be-
envisage a much
Bigger
broader role
role
for the
for you.
women's. I think it should be made autonomous.
I was going to bring
And
that
secondly, and I've recommended
Yes,
that to the government, also they can assist with the ombudsman. In fact, they can become far more useful and proactive and have a broader outreach and role for themselves. And those that commission can actually look after the whole ombudsman structure much more than the sexual harassment laws can then come for lack of execution in terms of there are loads of laws that we may bring and have already brought for the betterment of women, minorities, vulnerable communities. Social justice is always difficult to implement. Whenever you're trying to flatten a pyramid, it's difficult. So these ombudsmen can function for all those crimes as well. They can be ombudsmen for a much larger ambit of crimes than just sexual harassment.
Okay, so-
Domestic violence can also be brought to them, many other things,
And so here's my question. What sort of resistance have you met with working on
This time we had less resistance than on other laws for the first time, because one of the reasons is this is not an ordinance, number one. It was also driven by government. I mean, my experience has always been to take it through opposition, which automatically garners resistance. But this was one law that was driven and very powerfully driven by government, because we had the Labour Ministry sitting in all the meetings. I would call all the NGOs also. I would call the Labour Ministry, the
Law Ministry.
Human Rights, the Law Ministry, Women's
Because it does come
Ministry.
under all these areas.
They
It
are
does
all-
cover all.
And then that's where the resistance comes, obviously,
Yeah.
eventually. So I had that Women's Ministry for 3-4 months. So we led that effort. It also went through cabinet with the Prime Minister's very solid support. There was some resistance there, but he says, look, I mean, either we put a weight behind this, and it's part of the PPP manifesto for change, and we must adhere to that.
Yes.
Otherwise, what are we in government for? And people expect change, reform.
These progressive laws,
So,
especially around
and especially
women.
under the PPP.
The resistance essentially is now based around a very few things that is actually a lack of understanding. One lawmaker, you were in the gallery that day, stood up and said, well, there should be a husband protection law. And the speaker was on the ball enough to say that, well, this is about sexual harassment in the workplace. Maximum it impacts, and then we later clarified that the maximum impact on the domestic arena is for domestic workers. There's a separate domestic violence law. You can address that by all means.
I mean,
But there's a lack
not
of
about husbands of
appreciation.
marriage
And जिसे निजी sector हम कहते हैं, or private lives it can't regulate. Although I have views on that, but that's a separate issue.
Yeah.
So there was that kind of ignorance reflected on the floor of the house, as well as amazingly not a blanket resistance, amazingly a lot of responsiveness and an ability even